Between 1810 and 1830, Philadelphia's black population rose 48%. Leading up to the Civil War, the city became home to the largest number of free African Americans in the country and was a center for the abolitionist movement. Philadelphia was not only home to free black people, but also home to fugitive slaves, abolitionists, working class whites, and the affluent elite. While Philadelphia was a free city and a bastion for abolition, the African American population here still faced racism and violence, with many white residents holding anti abolition views. The Library Company of Philadelphia states that there were bloody anti black riots almost every year throughout the 1830s and 1840s that were simply manifestations of white hatred, most of them occurring in South Philadelphia. There were many underlying causes for this hatred and tension. Rapid industrialization, a flood of immigrants, and a fiercely competitive labor market were among a few. Then, the industrial boom ended, and Philadelphia began to face a depression and growing unemployment rate. African American and white residents fought for the jobs available, furthering the animosity between the groups. During the summer of 1834, a merry-go-round at Flying Horses Tavern near 7th and South Streets was frequented by many Philadelphia residents, both black and white. On August 11th of that year, rumors spread that black patrons had somehow insulted their white counterparts. A fight broke out between black and white residents, and a mob of several hundred white residents returned the next night for revenge. They destroyed the merry-go-round and robbed the home of a black family in the area. According to Jones, when confronted by law enforcement, the crowd resisted with chants of "down with the police." More than a dozen people were arrested, and many of them were injured by police. The next night, the mob of mostly white teenage boys and young men reconvened around 11 p.m. when they knew peace officers would be worn out and off the streets to attack the homes and businesses of any black families in the area, even though these families were mostly innocent. Among the damage were 37 homes, many of them being rendered uninhabitable, and 2 churches, including the First African Presbyterian Church. Many families were displaced, and 1 black person was killed. The mob was mostly poor, with Philadelphia newspapers such as the Saturday Courier and the Philadelphia Intelligencer labeling them as rude and turbulent spirits and the most brutish and lowest class of society. White South Philadelphia residents placed white candles in their windows to identify themselves and keep their properties safe. Philadelphia was a home for abolitionists, with the American Anti-Slavery Society being organized here in 1833 and the Pennsylvania Abolition Society being formed in 1837. But there was still a large population of residents who were strongly against abolition. Because of this, Philadelphia abolitionists had a hard time finding a space to hold their meetings, leading them to build Pennsylvania Hall. On May 12, 1838, the hall opened, and on May 16th, the hall was burned down, lasting only 4 days. On Wednesday, May 16th, 1838, women's rights abolitionists Angelina Grimke, Abby Kelly, Maria Weston Chapman, and Lucretia Mott spoke at an informal anti-slavery event, being heckled inside and having the building stoned from outside. That night, African American eventgoers were pummeled as they exited. The next day, the Anti-Slavery Convention of American Women held an official meeting at the hall. A mob began to form outside and police were called, but they failed to stop the mob. The mob broke into the building and set it on fire. The fire spread to neighboring buildings, and as firefighters arrived, they allowed the hall to burn, focusing their efforts on the neighboring structures. The following days, prominent Philadelphian abolitionists such as Lucretia Mott and Samuel Webb had both their lives and homes threatened. Mobs also began to attack important black businesses, trying to destroy a newly built shelter for colored orphans near 13th and Collow Hill and attacking Mother Bethel. the African Methodist Episcopal Church on 6th and Lombard. On August 11, 1842, over 1,000 members of the Black Young Men's Vigilant Association threw and participated in a parade to celebrate Jamaican Emancipation Day. During the parade, a flag was carried showing an enslaved person breaking his chains and the rising sun of freedom, which was misinterpreted by and offended many Irish bystanders. When the parade reached 6th and Lombard, Irish bystanders attacked parade goers, throwing animal intestines and waste at them, and began to chase them through the streets, breaking up the parade. The mob also burned public buildings that served the Black community. Among the buildings torched were Smith's Hall, a meeting place for abolitionists, and the Second African Presbyterian Church. Smith's Hall was owned by Stephen Smith, a wealthy Black abolitionist, and was also the meeting place for abolitionist groups after the burning of Pennsylvania Hall. Similar to that event, firefighters allowed these buildings to burn and focused on saving neighboring structures. Black families had their homes ransacked and were attacked, being dragged from their homes and beaten. Police arrested Black victims under the guise of protecting them from the mob. On July 24, 1918, Adela Bond, a Black probation officer, moved into her new home at 2936 Ellsworth Street in a predominantly white neighborhood. Bond stated that the second time she walked down Ellsworth Street, she was stoned. So when the movers arrived with her furniture, she stood in the doorway with a revolver. Her white neighbors felt as if Bond had invited conflict by doing this. Between the night of Friday, July 26th and Saturday morning, around 100 white men and boys gathered in front of Bond's home with guns. One man threw a rock through her parlor window, so Bond shot her revolver from her upstairs window into the air to call police for help. 23-year-old Joseph Kelly was unintentionally shot in the leg. Rioting ensued, and police eventually arrived, arresting several people. That same day, a white mob accused William Box, an African-American man, of theft. The mob surrounded Box, and in an attempt at self-defense, Box cut one of his attackers on the arm. That further enraged the mob, who then tried to lynch Box, but police arrived and arrested Box for assault and not any of the members of the mob. On Sunday, 23-year-old Henry Huff was chased by a mob at 27th and Titan Streets. Huff ran into a nearby home where he shot and killed plainclothes police officer 24-year-old Thomas McVeigh. Detective Thomas Myers and a civilian, Frank Donahue, were also shot but survived. For the next 24 hours, more than 5,000 men, both Black and white, engaged in a series of street battles, including individual fights, mobs, and gunfire between Washington Avenue, Dickerson, 23rd, and 30th Streets. 2 white men were ultimately shot to death, and around 250 police and volunteer officers patrolled the streets by the end of the day. On Monday, July 29th, Preston Lewis was severely beaten by officers Robert Ramsey and John Schneider, having to be hospitalized. Officer Schneider attacked Lewis a second time as he lay on a stretcher in the hospital. Schneider had to be restrained by other officers and removed from the room. Later that same day, officers Schneider and Ramsey arrested and attacked resident Riley Bullock at the corner of Titan Street and Point Breeze Avenue. They brought Bullock to the 17th District Station House, and Ramsey shot him in the back at point-blank range, killing him. That same night, a mob made up of the neighbors and friends of the deceased police officer, Thomas McVeigh, gathered outside of Henry Huff's house at 2743 Titan Street with clubs, knives, bricks, and revolvers, seeking revenge. On Tuesday, July 30th, leaders of Philadelphia's African American community call upon the mayor and director of public safety, stating that they have failed to protect the city's Black residents from mobs. Over the course of the next few days, saloons were closed, funerals were held, and the home of Adela Bond was broken into, her valuables being stolen and furniture being destroyed, although she had police guarding her home. 60 African American residents were arrested compared to only 3 white residents. After the rioting ended, every single police officer at the 17th District Station House had been transferred out, and the police department received a judicial rebuke for looseness in the investigation of the death of Riley Bullock. Officers Ramsey and Schneider were charged with murder, but ultimately found not guilty after a half-hour deliberation from a jury. Ramsey held that the shooting was accidental. His gun went off when he slipped on the steps. On Friday, August 28, 1964, Odessa Bradford and her husband Rush engaged in a domestic dispute while driving, coming to an abrupt stop at the corners of 22nd and Columbia Avenue. Officers Robert Wells, who was black, and John Huff, who was white, arrived at the intersection to break up the dispute, but Odessa and Wells began to argue. Wells stated that Odessa refused to follow commands, and he subsequently dragged her out of the car. A crowd that formed and had been watching began to throw bricks, bottles, and other debris at the officers. The crowd continued to grow, hundreds of people arriving before the cops could escape, and many began to loot nearby white-owned businesses as well as attacking the officers. At the time, the tension between black residents and white cops were high because of police brutality, corruptness, and an ongoing rumor that a white cop had beaten a pregnant black woman to death. Hundreds of officers responded to the scene, but were instructed by Mayor Howard Tate and Police Commissioner Howard Leary not to shoot or interfere. Philadelphia NAACP President Cecil B. Moore, among other civil rights leaders, appealed to the crowd to disperse, but the crowd rejected. One looter even stated that this would be the only time she would be able to get these things. After getting reports of shooters standing on roofs, police were allowed to engage. Mayor Tate established a citywide curfew, banned liquor, and ordered heavy patrolling of the area. By the time the rioting and looting ended on Sunday, 2 people were killed, 350 were injured, and about $4 million in damages were done to buildings on Columbia Avenue. Between 1,000 and 1,300 people were arrested, many also being injured by police. I know this video was long, and I did not mean for that to happen, but as I did my research for one of the riots, I found so much information that I had to share. If you would like to add anything or request a topic for a future video, leave me a comment down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.